Technical difficulties. Usual. That mine is my brain. All right. Okay, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get started into the word. Father, we thank you today for the privilege of coming to the house, being with your people. Lord, help this church to be a lighthouse. Help it to speak out. Speak out. You help us to be beacons of light for a dark world. Lord, bless us in what to talk about. I pray. Jesus. All right. Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18. I hope every week you kind of look ahead. Take those papers home with you, and that's what they're primarily for. Do some study afterwards. Remind yourself of what's going on. I hope it will be a help to you. This is, of course, another illustration, pardon me, of Paul's personality as much as anything. Yes, it's the story of establishing a very wicked and depraved area. But you see Paul in his humanness maybe as much as anything right here. Let me just read a few verses, kind of get us kicked off, and we'll go from there. After these things, Paul departed from Athens, went to Corinth, about a 50-mile journey, I think, if I remember correctly. He found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who recently came from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to him. And for us, we don't realize it, but anti-Semitism was strong in the Roman world. They didn't care much for Jews. And the reason is real simple. They didn't conform. They didn't conform to the Roman culture. One thing about Jews, no matter what, and I've been around Jews most of my life, Jews do not conform to where they are. They out and hold to their tradition, culture, no matter what. Now, of course, that is varying degrees. Why, for instance, when we were in Nashville, there were 3 types of Jewish synagogues. College that Bible college, place was right hard next to an Orthodox synagogue. Orthodox are those that hold very strictly to the law. Now, there is one group that's even stronger, and they're called Zionists. They're the ones with the little curly things down, and they wear the hats, and they dress a certain way. But these were very close, and in fact, so much so that Jewish rabbi that was there, if he forgot to get the lights turned off before 6 o'clock on Friday evening, because that's when the Sabbath started, and he'd get somebody to come over and cut them off for him because he couldn't the lights were blank. He would keep things very strict, and they would follow all the feasts, even set up little booths out behind the synagogue for the Feast of Tabernacle. Then there was the conservative one down the road a few miles, and it was the one that did not hold as strictly. They wear certain kind of clothes, and they all the law. Then the way on up in Belmead was the liberal Jewish, kind of like the liberal. Now that's very general, and it's been years. I hope I got all of it. There is, of course, basically, and it has nothing to do with quote, end quote, religion. say that very kindly. A Jewish rabbi that we visited one day, we asked him, about the basics. What he said was, Judaism is not a religion; it's a culture. Now, truthfully, we ought to think that way about Christianity. No, really, because it's not a religion; it's a person. It's our way of life. But they have preserved Judaism over these years. Obviously, everybody's tried to destroy the Jews. God said, you're not going to be destroyed. God said the Jewish people will return for them. They have been set aside during this time, but not destroyed or forsaken. All they get. Now, having said that, the Roman culture was anti-Semitic in so many ways. Claudius didn't like them, so he said, out of Rome you go. So they had to leave. Now, apparently they were already Christians. There was a church already in Rome, and apparently they had already become believers, but as soon as Paul got to Corinth, that's who he met. I think probably it's important to take a minute, think for a minute. How do we view biblical heroes of the faith? How do we view them? What is our attitude towards them? How do we? Yeah. Well, I think right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever. Last part of that chapter. My 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 word that comes to mind is superheroes. You know, if I were to meet Paul, when we get to heaven, I'm almost going to be looking for the S on his chest. You know what I mean? Kind of like Superman. But one of the things that we should not do is put them in such a separate category that we forget that they were human people, just like us. And when we look at Paul, this particular situation, um, we see his human uh, Bible characters. God, all the way through the Bible, God tries to protect us from that. He shows us their fault as well as some of the greatest heroes of the Bible committed great sin. Now, that does not eliminate sin is sin, right? So let's not say, well, since he was David, for instance, with Bathsheba, it's okay because he was a Bible hero and a man after God's own heart. No, it wasn't. And he paid a great price for his sin. The same is true with some who lived far less than stellar lives, like Samson, for instance. See, I'd have trouble putting Samson or Lot in the Hall of Faith, and yet he's right there. They're right there in Hebrews 11, and I'm saying, wow, how'd they get there? Can I tell you what that means? And I hope this will be an encouragement to you. God uses people, warts and all. Now, don't ask me to explain all of it, because from my point of view, if I were God, I'd have kicked them to the curb. Good thing I'm not God, amen. You know, because See, the truth is, when God sees us, He sees us as, He don't see us all that different. You know, you say, well, I haven't sinned like the guy that runs the local, say, abortion clinic. I'm not like him. And we could name a bunch of things. It's not going to take time. That's true. And I think that's commendable, especially from our point of view. But we've all committed the worst sin of all, unbelief. The worst sin above anything else: murder, abortion, addiction, all of it. Unbelief. Unbelief's the only thing that gets you to hell. You know that? And it's important to recognize that God sees us as we are, and He also sees us as we can be. Oh my, I'm thankful for that. And He works in us and through us. I wished I had time to develop that, but obviously in our short, brief time, I don't have time. But we see Paul, and Paul, as great as he was, and maybe the greatest man that has walked on the earth outside of Jesus, of course. But he was human. He left Athens beat down. He was lonely. He was discouraged. I don't have any doubt that 50-mile walk to Corinth was Paul beating himself up, wondering, here, what am I doing? Anybody ever been there? Ever been that discouraged? If you haven't, I'll tell you what it's like later. Because I have. He had been beaten, stoned, rejected, mocked, everywhere he went. Left for dead after he was stoned. And everywhere he went, they didn't like him. You know, I'm not sure I wouldn't have quit long before Paul got there. But quitting was not an option. I remember when I was in college, someone said, cut the word quit out of your dictionary. I don't think they literally meant take a pair of scissors and cut it out, which still probably wouldn't have been a bad idea. But what they were saying was very simple. Quitting is not an option. I love this quote here that I got from Weirdly, I think. It says, Dr. V. Raymond Edmond used to say to the students at Wheaton College, this is in Illinois, it's always too soon to quit. And Spurgeon used to say, by perseverance, the snail reached the ark. Oh, I love that picture, you know. Nothing any slower than an old snail, right? But he finally got there. Athens had been hard. He was tired. He faced an intellectual apathy that was like a brick wall. Actually, it reminds me of America today. We're so educated. We're educated beyond our common sense. You know what I mean? People don't want to listen to common sense or listen to somebody anymore unless it's got a PhD behind it and it's been clinically tested. You want to sell something on TV, just simply say clinically tested. Don't matter what clinic, doesn't matter who did it, but that'll sell it. Sad to say, that was what he faced. Now he comes to Corinth. Now, Corinth wasn't an intellectual city. And it's probably should have made a map or something, but I didn't. So I'll do my wonderful drawing. I know you're excited. Okay. I know it's a little exaggerated, but I don't know how to get it where you can get it the other way. Believe it or not, that's Greece. I know. Let me write this. Now you don't have a question. Now you know what it is. Of course, Greece was divided in ancient days into two areas. This was Achaia. This was Macedonia up on the northern section. You hear those terms in Scripture, and that often that's why I mentioned them. Now, Athens was over here. That one's trying to quit on me, but anyway. Athens was over here. Corinth was on this area right here. And interestingly enough, Greece is divided almost totally. That little split of water that is right there, the Aegean Sea is on the east, the Adriatic Sea is on the west, and Greece is connected by a little isthmus that just a little sliver of land less than 5 miles wide. Little sliver of land. Now here's the thing. Most commerce was by boat in those days, is that right? They didn't have airplanes. They didn't have trains. They didn't even have 18-wheelers. How about that? How could they exist? But anyhow, you got boats, here on this area, and they're wanting to get over here. Well, you say, well, they could just go this way. The Mediterranean Sea is not a calm place all the time, especially for the size boats and the type of boats that they had. It didn't take a whole lot of a storm to flip those things all over the place like a cork. So what they would do is they would come right here, and Kria is the port here, if I remember correctly, and they would bring their goods here, and then they would drop them off, and there were actually roads made just for that, and they had these enormous cart type things, and they would put their goods there, put them over here, and then a boat would come over here from the Adriatic Sea and pick up their goods and carry them wherever they needed to go. Say, well, that didn't make sense because they could just come down here. Like I said, number one, this is a whole lot longer, take a whole lot more time. Number two, it could also be very dangerous with the storms, especially at certain times of the year. Say, well, why didn't they just try to put a canal through there? Well, there is one now. But it wasn't finished until, I think, the late 1800s, somewhere along in there. And small boats, the really small boats, they would actually put on some sort of rollers and roll it across and dump it back in the water. Ingenious, wasn't it? We often think that we got all the knowledge. I mean, we got computers. What can these ancient people have? I got news for you. They did a whole lot more with a whole lot less. They actually figured out how to do stuff without a computer. These days, we can't even say 2 + 2 without a computer. But the amazing thing is how that was continued for years. But because of that, Corinth was formed, and it was one of the major cities. It had all kinds of people there. It's kind of like this area because of this area with the government. They had people from every country, every nation, every ethnicity. You name it, they were there. It also meant with that much transitness and people going through, it was, a very corrupt city. It was commercial, it was cosmopolitan, but it was very corrupt. It was named, its main temple was Venus, Aphrodite, Greek, Venus, and Roman. And on the tallest hill in the city, which is what they commonly did, was that temple along with hundreds of other temples for all the other gods. And one of the main things about Venus was that they had, it depends on who you read, but there has to be some exaggerations in some of those. One commentator said 10,000 temple prostitutes. That's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. But one of the main parts of the worship of Venus was immorality. They didn't just practice immorality. They didn't just condone immorality. They worshiped. He's shaking his head. I know, it almost would take a bath. Again. I'm telling you, it was corrupt. Anything you wanted was there. Now, we don't consider this, but we live here. So we've kind of become, numb for a lot of what goes on. I got news for you. It's a very corrupt area. And America has become very corrupt, especially in politics. And I wished I didn't say that. This is my country. Makes me want to. So somebody said, let's go to Montana, live out in the desert. We don't have any electricity or water or any connection to the outside world. We can become hermits. I don't think so. You know. Truth is, God didn't say for us to get out of the world and isolate ourselves. What God said was to be light in. God wanted there to be a light in Corinth, and God wanted Paul to do it. Paul was not really up to the task, right? Frankly, he was having a hard time. God knew that. Here's one of the exciting things about this. Now, watch it now. Don't miss all this. Paul had no money. You know that because he had to work secular employment in order to survive. He had no friends with him. Remember, Silas and Timothy had been left in Macedonia. They were to meet him in Athens, and I don't think Paul waited for them, apparently. He didn't have anybody or nothing except the Lord. What is it the song says? When God is all you have, all you need. First thing that happened when he walked into town was he met Aquila and Priscilla. That was a couple that we just came from Rome. And they happened to be tent makers. You know what Paul's trade was? He was a tent maker. And in that day, if I understand it right, and I'm not an expert, please, I'm by no means, but tent making involved a lot of leather work, as well as weaving of like goat hair, things like that, to make they didn't go down and buy canvas, you understand, like we would do today. But to make it watertight, weather resistant all the way around, it would take layers. And that's what Paul was doing. And apparently, since they had already set up shop, they took Paul in. They became immediate friends. Paul didn't even have a place to stay. So they put him up in their house. In fact, I think that's where the church was actually. So you've got this wonderful couple. And what happened? God directs him directly to that couple right off the bat. Isn't that great? Let me tell you something. We're not made to be alone. This COVID thing has caused people to be alone. And what's happening? We've got more suicides and addictions and you name it than there ever has been. And can I tell you, we're not made to be alone. Church was not meant for your couch and for you to just watch it on TV. If you're watching over the TV right now, I appreciate you watching. I hope you'll come to church. You're where you can get to a good Bible preaching church. Why? Because in the church you are around people. We need people. Boy, time's going to run out. If it does, it just runs out. We'll finish next. Let me tell you something. God created us how? In His image. What is God? Say there's one God. Yes, there is. But He manifests Himself how? Three persons. God is a, quote, social being, for lack of a better term. And that's not a good term because you can't describe God that way, frankly. But what I'm saying is simply this. The Trinity is a perfect fellowship. Doesn't need anybody else or need anything else. And what happened at creation? God said, let us. Plural terms are used. In fact, listen, the Hebrew word for God in creation is Elohim. It is a plural word. You say, well, that's the plural of majesty. Yeah, it might be, but it's also plural that indicates that there's more to God than we think of. God's a fellowship within they went down and talked within the Trinity during the time before the flood. That here's what we need to do. And let me tell you, that's important because we have a tendency, and it's part of our sinful nature, to want to isolate. Say, I don't need anybody else. I don't need anything else. Yes, you do. You know why God made woman? Besides the fact she's a whole lot smarter and prettier than, because Adam needed companionship to complete. You get that? I'm going to tell you something. You can't be a hermit, not and be totally happy. Just can't happen. I like to went nuts during those weeks. We were isolated, quarantined, or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to tell you, it was all I could do to stand it. And you say, well, you just go, yeah, but it was all I could do to fight off just simple depression. I mean, come on. Am I right? Does anybody else have that problem? See, if I hadn't had Gay around, I would have done that. So the truth is very simple. We are not to be alone. Paul wasn't doing all that well. And he needed people. He needed some friends. And so Aquila and Priscilla came along. And I lost place because I just got pushed it. So God gave him people. God gave him a means to take care of himself. God always does. It's interesting. I had a guy in college that said he would get on his knees and pray and say, God, I need money. The bill's coming up next week. I got to pay my bill for the school tuition. So what would God do? Send him a job. See, other guys are praying and they're getting money in the mailbox. I'd get a note in the mailbox say, we got a job for you at the office. Come on. And that's kind of the way I've always been. God provides something. Is that right? And yeah, so God took care of Paul, gave him a way to take care of his financial needs. And he continued to talk to the folks in the synagogue. About that time, Silas and Timothy showed up and they brought good news from the churches in Macedonia that God was continuing those churches no matter the problems they'd run into. And from Philippi, they brought money. People at Philippi had gotten together and had provided an offering. Apparently they did that quite often based on a couple of the verses in Philippians. And so now he didn't have to work. He could actually spend full time in the ministry, and he did so. He continued to teach. He continued to share and reason with them in the synagogue. They didn't like it, though. As usual, the Jews began to stir up problems. And believe it or not, it just started the same cycle all over again. I can just hear Paul, you know. I can just hear Paul saying, well, here we go again. The Jews are stirring it up. It's going to get worse. They'll finally throw me in jail and run me out of town. If you're discouraged already, you reckon that wouldn't be something you'd do? Have you ever done that kind of thing? Here we go again. But what's interesting is that's not what happened. My God is a God who loves to interrupt things. When I was a boy, hiding behind me so much. I see Heidi shaking her head back there. Tidings would interrupt the President of the United States during the State of the Union. Am I right, Heidi? And I was just that way. I would ask a question right in the middle of something, whether it had anything to do with what was going on or not. Drove my day. My mother would just, you know, and I really wasn't trying to be ornery. And I've heard the words "do not interrupt" so many times they were plastered somewhere in between my two ears. The truth is, though, God interrupts. But God always interrupts at the right time. God always has a good reason for interrupting, not like me. And God interrupted what was going on to give encouragement to Paul. I've never had a vision, honest. But I have had encouragement from God more ways than I can take a stick at. It could be a phone call. In the early days of this church, or early days of my being in, we were having folks, you know, you'd win 5 and 4 would get transferred out before you could even get them discipled. We would turn over a congregation 4 to 5 years, about 80%. Not quite that transit. And just getting somebody that would stay, you know, was a great encouragement. I can name names, but I won't. I remember when this guy right back here was saved. That was a day of encouragement. Easter Sunday, wasn't it, Nate? And God used him and has used him in the church. I could go on. God would do things. Sometimes it was miraculous. Sometimes be something so insignificant that only I could see the hand of God. I remember back when I was first pastor, and I wasn't about 21, I preached a funeral. And I didn't know the people actually. I forgot now how I even got involved. Somebody in the church. We had a small church. If we had 75, it was a big Sunday. But I preached a funeral, but they didn't have money to pay me that week. So the treasurer would come over and say, you know, my creditors didn't care a bit about that, if you know what I mean. But I decided that week, $20 was my tithe. How long it's been? $20 was my tithe. And I said, if I go buy groceries, I give the $20. Well, I gave the $20. Good tithing. You know, that next, I think it was on Monday night, the doorbell rang, and one of the daughters that I'd preached the funeral, we didn't pay you anything. take care of you. Handed me something. You want to know how much it was? $20. We rejoice. I could go on and on and on. God in His Son. That's not just for preachers. You get discouraged, you get down, you get depressed. I'll tell you, if you'll let Him, God will encourage you. It could be a scripture verse. It could be someone calling and saying, "Hey, I have a gentleman, and most of you have heard me talk about him. He's a very good friend. I don't know if I doubt that he's probably in his own Sunday school. But I have a very, to the Lord 40 years ago. Every once in a while, he'll call me up. Before he gets off the phone, I don't know where I'd be that day. And we'll talk a few minutes. I'll get off the phone. I'll be saying, you know what? Those phone calls that come, I was sometimes at the very lowest point from that phone call. That guy back there, every now and then, been the guy that's encouraged. I call him my Barnabas. Courage. Folks, be an encourager to someone. You don't know what kind of shape they're in, or where they're going, or what's happening. Walk in that door, you don't know anything about it. You reach out to them. Most people, that door, need something. Is that right? Well, I know. We didn't get but about halfway through, maybe. Probably not even that far. But we'll pick it up next week. You can keep the same lesson. I'll ask Andy to print off a few more. So we'll pick up on this. Too much for us just to run over it too fast. So all right? Lord, thank you that you encourage our spirit. Oh, how we need your encouraging spirit. That's exactly what you call that Spirit of God. Third person. Be the comforter. Very word that is used. The word for coming alongside, holding up the arm. Thank you, Lord, that's what we need, especially in these days. It seems like the world is falling apart. Thank you, Lord, you don't fall apart. You haven't changed. This isn't the first time you've seen problems in this whole wicked world. Help us to hang on to you, Rock of Ages, the one we can depend on, the chief cornerstone that designs it. Thank you, dear Father. Jesus' name. Amen. Stay around. We're going to hear some good preaching in a few minutes. I see that